Now it's time for Viking Mail Call, a weekly show where you, the fans, get to ask the questions on your mind and have them answered by former Minnesota Vikings linebacker and coach, Pete Bursich. And now your host, Tom Moore.
Welcome, everyone, to Vikings Mail Call. I'm Tom Moore from VikeFans.com, and I'm joined by my co-host, former NFL linebacker and now game day radio color analyst for the Minnesota Vikings, Pete Bursich. Well, Pete, we're a football show, but I know many of our fans are turning their attention to March Madness and the NCAA basketball tournament now. I gotta wonder at this point in time, are you going to go all in on Notre Dame again this year to go back to the finals as you did last year in Brad Johnson's challenge?
Yeah, I mean, it almost paid off, too. I think had they gone one game further. So I bet on the dark horse, and it did well, but I'm not picking any 16 seeds to beat number one seeds anymore. I'm done with that.
Good, I appreciate that, because I know when you were crowing last year, you were in 9th place. At the end of the tournament, you were 116th.
Yeah, it's a fall. It's a bit of a rise and fall from grace, as we would call it, I guess.
You know what? No guts, no glory. And I'll tell you what, with that, Pete, we got an opportunity to welcome back a former Viking and someone who knows a lot about NFL quarterbacking. And check this out. In his 17-year NFL career, he threw for almost 29,000 yards and 180 touchdowns. But beyond that, he was All-Pro twice, a Pro Bowler 4 times, where he was the only back-to-back Pro Bowl MVP in league history. And his career peaked when he was the 2002 MVP for the entire NFL, in a year where he led his Oakland Raiders to Super Bowl 37. Pete, can you tell the fans what former Viking is joining us today?
Yeah, and I'm going to add one thing to this. Is he's one of my favorite color commentator for football games, and it's not an easy job. It's Rich Gannon. Rich, how are you today?
Pete, I'm doing great, Tom. It's great to be with you guys, and love talking football, and specifically love talking Minnesota Vikings.
Well, sounds good. And I'll tell you, Rich, before I turn it over to Pete, I want to do this for the fans. I remember you coming out into the league in 1987 out of Delaware as a rookie, and you were originally drafted by the Patriots, who I think wanted to make you a running back. And I know you were a proficient passer in the wing tee offense in college. And I'm wondering, how did you get the Patriots to release you to give you that chance to be a quarterback in the NFL?
Yeah, it was kind of a crazy story. I was a 4th-round draft pick of the Patriots. I thought it was kind of unusual that they would take me. They never worked me out. And of course, at the time, they had a pretty good trio of quarterbacks. They had Tony Easton. They had Tom Ramsey, was a young quarterback that they really liked out of UCLA, a draft pick. And, of course, they also had Steve Grogan. So I thought to myself, how do I fit into that trio? And so and then I got the phone call from Dick Steinberg, who was the general manager at the time, and Raymond Burry was the head coach. And they basically said, hey, we want to find the best position for you, which is code for you're not going to play quarterback for the Patriots. And so I talked to my agent. I called the team back and just said, I think you made a mistake. I'm going to go to law school rather than you come play for the Patriots. And so it turned out 6 days later, I got traded to the Minnesota Vikings. And it was probably a much better situation at the time. They had Tommy Kramer and Wade Wilson, but it was a chance for me to come in and really watch and learn. I wasn't ready to play as a rookie, and it provided me that opportunity to kind of learn under 2 veteran quarterbacks.
Well, I'll tell you what, it was interesting. Even as a rookie coming in, you could see the flash, and specifically not only the passing, it was your running skills. And, ultimately you started 35 games for the Vikings between 90 and 92. And what I'm wondering was, what was your experience like as a young quarterback in Minnesota, and what were your memories of being a Minnesota Viking?
Well, they were challenging times. We went through a lot of change. We went through coaching change, several coordinator changes, and that's really hard on a young quarterback when you're having to constantly learn a new system. And so it was a struggle for me. There's no question about that. And then Denny Green came in 1992 and kind of pulled the rug out from under me. We had a good season going. We were 8-3 at the time, and then all of a sudden he decided to make a quarterback change. And I knew that at that point that my days in Minnesota were numbered. I got a chance to go to, obviously got traded to the Redskins and then spent 4 years in Kansas City, which were really invaluable for me. I got some really good coaching, got a chance to play with some good players, and was on some really good teams. And that provided me the opportunity, of course, in 1999 to go off to Oakland in free agency. But I loved my time in Minnesota. My rookie year, we went to the NFC Championship game. So I thought we had some success early, but I'd say overall, I didn't have a great experience with Denny Green.
Obviously, Minnesota searched for a starting quarterback for a long time. I can't even begin to tell you what it was like for fans and media to say, well, we had a guy in Rich Gannon, but he left. So, what could have been potentially for us?
Yeah, no, I just look. I think it's a privilege to play this great game. We're fortunate. I look at the Vikings. I'm really excited about the job that Mike Zimmer's done, along with Rick Spielman. In the last 2 years, his team has made great strides. I like the young quarterback a lot. I think he's a guy that's going to continue to get better at his craft. I think getting Adrian Peterson back last year made a world of difference. I think now the big question is how can they continue to build on what they did a year ago?
Rich, to that point, a lot of it was the offensive line, and they've addressed some of that, I think, already in free agency. But you had the chance to see the Vikings play a couple times this year, and offensively, what holes or what gaps did you see or that needed to be filled? I think the other situation that we have now is losing Mike Wallace. I know he wasn't much of a factor by the numbers, but as you know, if you're chasing the offensive line and you get the offensive line fixed, then that problem sometimes will move somewhere else. And some of us are just worried that Teddy's not going to have enough targets to throw to.
Well, I think they'll address that. Wallace, I think, was limited. I mean, there's no question he has the ability to stretch the field. But kind of an inconsistent route runner, and the production simply hasn't been there. I look at Teddy Bridgewater, and I see a guy that's a very good decision maker. I think the thing, Pete and Tom, that I like the most about him, I think he's a very unselfish player, and that's kind of unusual at that position. If it means handing the ball off 35 times 1 week, he's happy to do it. He's not really into his stats and all that. All he cares about is winning. He's put his team in a position to have a chance to win most of the games that he started for the Vikings. I think he's going to get stronger. He's a guy that needs to put on a little bit weight and get a little bit stronger in the weight room. I think just becoming even more and more comfortable with the offense and taking more control and ownership of it. The ability to change plays at line of scrimmage and the ability to have that dialogue with North Turner, the play caller, to be able to say, yeah, I like this, or I want to do more of this. I think it's going to be really important. And I think when you look at the offense in general, I think their ability to create more big plays, more explosive plays in the passing game. And they've got arguably the best running back in the game right now in AP, but they've got to be able to be a more consistent team pushing the ball downfield, and that starts at the quarterback position.
We just recently signed Alex Boone to play guard. I know he was a 49er NFC. Did you get a chance to see him play at all this season, and what can Viking fans expect from him?
Yeah, I've got a chance to watch him a lot. I've covered a number of their games. I did one of their games in the midpoint in the season, and he's a tough guy. He's going to bring a high level of professionalism and attention to detail to this offensive line. Good athletic ability. He's got the long arms. Guy that really can play tackle if you ask him to. But he's all 6'7.5", 300 pounds. He's been durable. He's got the ability to kind of anchor. He also has the ability to get up on the second level. Very good quickness, pretty smooth when he has to pull and do those type of things. Can cut off the backside. But I just like the fact that he doesn't take plays off. Very instinctive guy, tough guy that's going to bring, I think, a different mentality to that offensive line.
And you have the situation with Matt Khalil at left tackle who's going into a contract year. Have a guy like him next to Khalil, maybe push him a little bit or at least get that nastiness back. And that's how it works sometimes with that offensive line, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think if you study the 49ers over the years, they've had one of the better offensive lines in football, absent last year where they went through the coaching change and lost, a number of key players, including Anthony Davis, who played alongside Alex. But I think you're right, Pete. He's going to help everyone around him. I think he'll help the center, John Sullivan. I think he'll help if he in fact he's going to play left guard or help Matt Khalil. And, Matt can use some help. But, having a good guard, we always talk about when you build a football team, you want to be strong down the middle. And, you want to be strong inside. And I think adding Alex Boone certainly goes a long way to improving the toughness of that offensive line.
What do you know about Tony Sparano? I mean, he's a former head coach. Now he's the offensive line coach with the Vikings. From a run game standpoint, what do you think he can bring to the table with an Adrian Peterson in the backfield?
Well, I think this is a good hire by the staff, and particularly Mike Zimmer. I also think that they've made some other additions to the staff that I think are notable as well, including Pat Shermer. So Well, let's start with Tony Sperano. I think he's a guy that, he's spent a lot of time with Bill Parcells. He's got kind of that mentality, that mindset. He's old school. He's a good communicator. I covered did a lot of his games when he was the head coach of the Raiders. So I know him on a personal level, and he's going to care about his players. I think these guys will play hard for him. He's very good with the X's and O's. And this is how he grew up around the game. He grew up as an offensive line coach in college, came into the league as an offensive line coach, has coached tight ends, so he gets the protections, the running game, and I think he'll be a good asset for someone like Norv Turner.
You do have 3 former head coaches on Zimmer's staff, and they're all on the offensive side.
And all 3 have called plays. And even for a brief period, Tony Sperano has called plays. He did it in New York. So I think these are some great hires by Mike Zimmer.
Do you think that there could be, if you have too many guys that try to play the role of head coach, can't it be an issue with Turner, the play caller, or can you foresee any of that, or is that something that the head coach needs to manage?
I don't think it's going to be a problem when you consider the personalities of the men involved. I think Norv is, he's been around. He's a take control type of guy. I think Tony Sperano and Pat Shermer understand their roles, and I think are excited to be a part of an organization that's got a good young quarterback, and an organization that's coming off of a division title a season ago. And so I really don't know the folks like I do. I don't think it's going to be an issue at all. I think these guys are committed to doing everything they can to help this team win. I think there's a high level of professionalism, attention to detail. And I think Norv's done a good job with this group. In fact, Norv and Pat Shermer, I think, have spent some time together in the past.
You see rookies coming in every single year. How has the position changed, and how has it evolved? And are these college kids, with the option and things that they're running, these pretty simple offenses, you see decisions and checks and things being made by the sidelines, is that helping or hurting these kids, these quarterbacks coming out of college?
Well, the game's changed. It continues to change and evolve, and with the rules and so on and so forth. And I would say this: most of the players that come out of college simply aren't ready to play, and we don't really have a developmental league anymore. It's really hard to get these guys the number of snaps and reps to get them up to speed so they can go out and handle themselves. And what happens is that a lot of them are forced to play before they're ready. They have a bad experience. The team loses confidence in them. The fans turn on them, and these guys are never the same. And so, that's why it's really important it's not just whether the young quarterback's ready to play, but is the team around him ready for the young quarterback? That's the other component of it. So, I would say this: I think that there's certainly a shortage of quality players at that position in our game. There's not a lot of depth and talent at the quarterback position. You just look at the league right now, and you look at teams out there that are looking for quarterbacks. I mean, that's amazing. You look at Buffalo, Chicago, and Dallas. All need quarterbacks to back up their starters. I mean, they don't have that backup. Cleveland, the Rams, the Jets in the market for a quarterback. They can't get Fitzpatrick signed. Denver, obviously losing, Brock Osweiler. So the Vikings are in a pretty good situation. You consider that Teddy Bridgewater is just entering his 3rd season, and they've got a couple of backups that they feel pretty comfortable with, but. There's no question. There's teams out there that are in dire straits right now to find help at that position.
Well, who do you think could be, say, the Carolina Panthers of this year, the team that surprises everybody? Is there any teams out there that you think are just a year or two away from being contenders?
Well, I think there's some teams that are clearly getting better. I'm not so sure about contenders, but maybe even teams that will get back into the playoffs. I think the Oakland Raiders have been very aggressive. So has Jacksonville so far in free agency. They've got young quarterbacks. They've got some young receivers, especially Jacksonville. I mean, you look at Jacksonville's roster right now, offense particularly, they've got Blake Bortles. They just signed Chris Ivory. They've got T.J. Yeldon. They've got Allen Hurns, Allen Robinson. Last year they went out and made a move for Julius Thomas. I mean, this is a pretty talented team around Blake Bortles. And then defensively, of course, they just went out and spent a boatload of money on Malik Jackson. You look at the Oakland Raiders and what they've done the last couple of years. This roster looks completely different. They've been very aggressive in free agency. So I'm not suggesting that these teams are ready for a Super Bowl, but I think these are teams that have been on the outside looking in for so long, and it wouldn't surprise me to see one or maybe even both of those teams in the postseason next year.
When you look at the teams that have spent money free agent-wise, and it's interesting to see that you can't do the old Washington Redskin bit where you just pay a bunch of money and bring in a bunch of big names and hope everything works out. You got to build from the grassroots, and you got to have a good, solid talent base. And getting back to the Vikings is like we always do. I think that is one thing here that Spielman and Zimmer have been able to do.
Yeah, I think their philosophy of building through the draft makes a lot of sense. I think you look at the Packers have done that. The Patriots, for the most part, have tried to do that. They're not afraid to play with young players. I mean, I think a great example, last year on offense, Stephon Diggs. I mean, here's a fifth-round pick, the guy that was the 146th overall, a player taken overall in the draft last year, and he comes in. And he was outstanding for the Vikings. And I think he's got a big upside, and other players that maybe haven't been first round picks or second round picks. Guys, I think when you look at the really good general managers, they have success on day 2 and day 3 of the draft. I think Rick Spielman has done that. I think their philosophy of when free agency makes some sense, but you look at even the defense. I mean, you look at the success they've had out there in Los Angeles with the UCLA kids. Anthony Barr has been a terrific player for them.
Kendricks has done that.
Yeah, and so and then they've had a good mix of some veteran free agents that have come in and made an impact. So that's really how you have to do it. I think if you decide to spend a boatload of money and every year and throw these high dollar contracts at the veteran free agents, that's a mistake. But I think the Vikings have been pretty selective and chosen really to focus on drafting and developing young players in their program.
Tell me this, how do you like your current gig, calling games on television?
I enjoy it, Pete. I've been lucky. I've been at CBS 11 years and get a chance to really call mostly AFC package, but get some NFC games on occasion, and I've really enjoyed it. I've had some great partners at CBS. I've worked with, obviously, Dick Enberg and Don Criqui and Marv Albert and Kevin Harlan, Ian Eagle. I've really worked with a number of really talented play-by-play men and great partners and really guys who are unselfish. And it's really, you think about the game of football, it's a team game, and you think about producing and broadcasting a game. There's so many players that are involved. You've got technicians, you've got stats people, you've got camera people, you've got spotters and stats. It's a big ensemble, and that's why when you pull it off and you have a good game, you enjoy the whole process. But I will tell you this: I never forget my first game back in 2005, and I remember leaving the broadcast booth after the game feeling, you know what, we didn't lose, we didn't win, but it was a different feeling. It's a lot different feeling to get on that bus when you're not all banged up. But I've enjoyed it, and I've been fortunate to be with a pretty good network in CBS.
Going back to Deflategate, there was an article that Brad Johnson had done, and I don't remember if it was years before or right around the same time, talking about the Tampa Bay Oakland Raider game and kind of the agreement that the two of you had going into that. Is that ring a bell to you at all?
Well, the rules have changed. Back then, neither team could provide the footballs, which was really insane. I mean, this is how we make our living, throwing them, and so the league was pretty paranoid about the league preparing the balls, and it wasn't. Look, a lot of teams would get with the equipment manager that would be, at the home site and say, "Hey, look, can I look at the balls?" Sometime on Friday or Saturday. So Brad was worried about it. But even more so than I was, and so both equipment staffs talked to I think it was the Chargers at the time. That's where we played Super Bowl 37, and I don't know about Brad paying them to be able to look at the balls and just to make sure they weren't slick. That's why the league changed the rule, and now both teams can quarterbacks and can prepare the footballs the way they want and provide their own balls for the game. Because it's such a passing game, the worst thing a quarterback can get is a slick ball in his hands and not be able to grip it and let it fly. So that wasn't such a big deal. I think it became such a big story because Brad said something about it, it was in right after what came out with Brady's whole deal. So, but not a big deal. I would say this about Brad. I was with Brad when he was a rookie, and out of Florida State, and I'm just proud of the career that he's had, and not only that, but how he's conducted himself. He was a great professional, man of great character and integrity, and so I would never envision Brad trying to do something to circumvent the rules.
From what I understand now, Rich, I'm sure if you've talked to Brad, he's told you about it, but his son, who I believe is going into high school, you may be calling some of his games in about, 6, 7, 8 years.
He's a good little player, and that doesn't surprise me. And, Brad just had a great way about him. And, what's amazing is that we talk about Denny Green, and he ran off so many good quarterbacks. I mean, Brad and I went up playing together in Super Bowl 37. We were both Pro Bowl quarterbacks, and both of us, were in Minnesota at the same time, and yet we weren't good enough to play for Denny Green. So, and he went through, I think Denny Green went through, a dozen or more quarterbacks in his time as the coach of it seemed like every year is a different quarterback. So, I remember he had Jeff George and Randall Cunningham and Jim McMahon and, Sean Salisbury. I mean, you go down the line.
Oh, Dante Culpepper.
Yeah. So, I was thrilled to start my career here. I still live here in Minnesota. I married my wife, and that's one of the reasons why I still live in Minnesota. So, but it's been great, and I still enjoy and still follow the Vikings very closely.
Before I let you go, Rich, the one question I wanted to ask you that's not Viking related, but is quarterback related. You got a couple of quarterbacks of name, one who's shown some success, one who hasn't so far. Curious about your thoughts of Robert Griffin III, RG3, and where he might end up and the success he might have based on skill set you see, and then the trouble Johnny Manziel. Is that a person who can land somewhere else and have success in the NFL?
Let's start with RG3. I would tell you that he's a guy that certainly had a struggle since his rookie year. Injuries are a part of it. I think the system change and the coaching change had an impact on him. I would also tell you that he's got to learn to function from the pocket. He's a guy that has had struggles doing that, mastering a complicated offensive system. And I don't know that he's going to get a chance to go anywhere and really compete for the starting job. I think he's going to have to be a backup and kind of work his way back into this thing. In terms of Johnny Manziel, I think his situation is far worse. I got a chance to do one of his games last year against Kansas City. I think just from a pure talent perspective, he has some rare athleticism to him. Not the biggest guy. Another guy that really struggles functioning from the pocket. In our game today, these defensive ends, these outside linebackers, they do such a great job getting up the field and containing you and really forcing you to kind of function and throw from the well, and neither of those quarterbacks have done a good job of that. And of course, Manziel's got off-the-field issues. He's got some issues with maturity and discipline. And I'd be real surprised if any team would give him a chance next year to come in and even compete for a starting job. He'd have to go to the back of the line as well and kind of earn the trust and the respect of teammates and coaches if he, in fact, gets another opportunity.
It's funny. I mean, last time I played quarterback, I was in Little League, and you mentioned something I just got asked before I let you go, and that is sitting in the pocket. How difficult is that for a quarterback to tune out what's around him and stand there knowing he's going to take a shot?
Yeah, you have to have great focus and concentration, and you can't be, if you're sitting there worried about getting hit, then you're probably in the wrong profession. I think you got to be able to sit in there and have great courage. And some guys that seems like that's foreign to them, but most guys that get to this level, at least reach this level, there's a reason that they've made it this far, and that's usually not much of an issue. If you don't have the courage and the toughness to stand in there and play that position, then you're not going to last very long.
Well, Rich, we appreciate you joining us today to talk football on the Minnesota Vikings.
I got to tell you guys, it was great to be with you, and enjoy all you guys are doing. And really looking forward to this draft, which is right around the corner.
Before we go, we want to remind our listeners to catch Rich on Sundays during the season on the NFL on CBS. And as Rich told you, he's still a Minnesota resident, so follow him on Twitter, @RichGannon12, where you're sure to get his thoughts on your Minnesota Vikings. So until next week, for Pete Burcich, I'm Tom Moore. So long, everyone.